Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer and today's video is going to be about epistemology. Epistemology is one of those things that you hear all the time if you have friends that like philosophy and talk about philosophy like I do, right? And to be honest, in the past I never really cared to know what the hell epistemology was. I just knew it was a branch of philosophy and it was probably too boring for me to delve into, so I never really cared. But you know, this word gets thrown around so much that I was like, okay, it must be important. So, and of course this is not gonna be a super in-depth explanation. This is an explanation for people like me who only want to know the very basics, so that next time that you are at a philosophy conference you don't have to be like, oh yes, I know what epistemology is, that you actually know. Because to be honest, when I used to hear that word, I would be like, epistemology? But yes, if you want a digestible explanation of what epistemology is, keep watching. So, what is epistemology? Well, epistemology is a branch of philosophy that has to do with knowledge. But there is a difference. There are theories of knowledge, which are very specific, and each one of them has their own opinions about knowledge, and they're very different from each other and they contradict each other. But epistemology is concerned with knowledge in general, and it is concerned with some basic questions like, what is knowledge? How do we acquire knowledge? How do we know that something is knowledge? How do we know that we know, right? So epistemology is concerned with answering the questions regarding knowledge, and two of the areas that it's concerned with are the following, and this is from Wikipedia. The philosophical analysis of the nature of knowledge and the conditions required for a belief to constitute knowledge, such as a truth and justification, right? Because not all beliefs are knowledge. For something to be knowledge, it has to be true, it has to be proven. For example, let's say that you believe that in order to survive, humans must drink water. Well, how do you prove that that isn't just a belief? How do you prove that humans in fact need water to survive, right? So again, from Wikipedia, it says, potential sources of knowledge and justified belief, such as perception, reason, memory, and testimony. So there are different ways in which one can acquire knowledge, and these are the four of them, right? So going back to the water example, how do you know that people need water to survive? And it's not just a belief that you have. Well, in this instance, you know from experience that people have died when they don't drink water, right? So that is the source of that knowledge would be memory and testimony, because you have experienced it. But you could also justify the fact that people need water to survive with reason, using science to determine human cells cannot survive unless they have H2O, right? But okay, knowledge, answering questions of knowledge. Why is it important to study knowledge? Isn't it okay to just let people believe whatever they want and justify their beliefs in any way they want? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Well, first, let's go back to the potential sources of knowledge bit. This is very important because there are people out there who claim that you can just get knowledge by believing or having faith. But we'll get to that a little bit more. But first, let's talk about one of the sources of knowledge mentioned, which was sense perception. This is what multiple theories of knowledge are concerned with. They want to answer the question, can you trust your senses as a means of acquiring knowledge? Well, let's think about it. Our senses, such as smell, taste, touch, and vision, have developed over a long period of time, you know, like hundreds and hundreds of years, with the sole purpose of helping us survive, right? So if you can see better, then you are able to spot when there is a lion near you, and that way you can run away and keep your life. And if you have a more developed sense of touch, you can know when something is too hot that it might harm you, right? So our senses have developed to help us distinguish between what is good and bad for us, which simultaneously has helped us discover certain universal truths, such as fire is hot, fire can kill things. Our senses are not here to trick us or confuse us as much as many people like to claim. Although, of course, there are exceptions, like if you're on drugs, your sense perception is altered because of this foreign substance, and you might be on top of a building and you see this beautiful garden and you're like, oh, what a beautiful garden, I'm gonna walk into it, but you're actually just falling off a cliff. Off the building. In that case, yes, your senses deceive you and your senses harm you, but it wasn't your senses, it was your senses under the influence of a drug. But for the most part, our senses are supposed to help us, and they help us discover universal truths, and they help us acquire knowledge. And I wanted to mention this because it's something important that we're going to circle back to. But for now, I want to read you a very important quote related to the topic of epistemology by Ayn Rand that I think is very important to the conversation. And it says, since man is not omniscient or infallible, you have to discover what you claim as knowledge and how to prove the validity of your conclusions. Does man acquire knowledge by a process of reason or by sudden revelation from a supernatural power? Is reason a faculty that identifies and integrates the material provided by man's senses, or is it fed by innate ideas implanted in man's mind before he was born? Is reason competent to perceive reality, or does man possess some other cognitive faculty which is superior to reason? Can man achieve certainty, or is he doomed to perpetual doubt? The extent of your self-confidence and of your success will be different according to which set of answers you accept. So that final part of that quote is so important because it is so crucial having the right theory of knowledge if you want to have a happy life, a successful life, a confident life, right? Let's read that part again. It said, the extent of your self-confidence and of your success will be different according to which set of answers you accept. By that it means, where do you accept knowledge comes from? Do you accept it comes from a supernatural power, or do you accept that knowledge comes from objective sources that you can fact check?
I'm going to read it again. The extent of your self-confidence and of your success will be different according to which set of answers you accept.
This means that if you believe that you're incapable of having certainty and that you can never be sure if what you know and what you believe is right, then of course this is going to affect your actions. It's going to make you vacillate, doubt yourself, and many times you're going to choose not to act because you don't have self-confidence in your mind's ability to think and to know what's right and what's wrong, etc. On the other hand, if you trust in your mind's ability to think, to reason, to make good judgment calls, to gain knowledge, you will have confidence in your life choices, and you, for the most part, will make good life choices. And I say for the most part because in the process of gaining knowledge, acquiring knowledge, sometimes one makes mistakes because you might end up believing that something that is wrong is right and you do the wrong thing. But the good thing about this is that you can also gain knowledge from experience. So when you make a mistake, you learn from it and you apply those learnings, those insights into your future actions, and that way you improve yourself. This is what gaining knowledge via memory is all about. The more you improve your body of knowledge, the more confidence you gain to move through life as a competent human being. Now let's move on to another quote that is also really good for this whole epistemology conversation. It says, "In the history of philosophy, with some very rare exceptions, epistemological theories have consisted of attempts to escape one or the other of two fundamental questions which cannot be escaped. Men have been taught that knowledge is either impossible, skepticism, or that it is available without effort, mysticism." And this is from Consciousness and Identity by Ayn Rand. So skepticism and mysticism are the enemies of true knowledge, which derives from reason, from thinking, not from not thinking or from someone else's commands, like God's commands. So let's talk more about mysticism, this knowledge without effort. Let's give an example. Let's say, for example, you are a 10-year-old child and you go to Sunday school one day because your parents take you to church, and then there they tell you that Jesus can hear your prayers. Jesus can hear your thoughts. But up until this point, as a 10-year-old child, what you have experienced is that people cannot hear you unless you speak. They cannot know what's going on in your head unless you tell them to. That's what your experience has shown you for 10 years. And then now someone is telling you, well, there is someone who can hear your thoughts. It is literally the opposite of what you know to be truth. And to make things weirder, they're telling you that someone who doesn't exist, who you cannot see, who you will never meet, is the person who can hear and read your thoughts, your prayers. And you're just supposed to believe it without evidence. It is just written in a book and you're supposed to believe it. And how is this destructive? Well, if you accept just one tiny little piece of knowledge that comes from mystic sources, from sources that you cannot prove, then that makes you more prone to accepting other bits of knowledge handed to you in that way. And it encourages not to think. Why should I think? Why should I believe my senses? Why should I try to come up with my own conclusions if universal truths are going to be given to me by non-thinking, by mystic methods? And a lot of people fall into that trap, like millions of people fall into that trap. And when you get into that pattern, it's very destructive because you start to accept that you don't always have to trust your own mind, that sometimes you can just trust the mystics, right? The people who claim to have a connection to the universe that tells them truths. In that case, you just become more prone to accepting whatever these people tell you as truth. If you accept one of their truths without evidence, such as Jesus can hear your thoughts, then you're gonna be more prone to accepting some other truths that they're giving you without evidence, without having to do any thinking about it. For instance, they might come up with something crazy like, well, God spoke to me and he says we have to get our axes and go kill everybody that's wearing blue. And you're gonna be like, well, why? How does that make sense? That makes no sense. But the mystic is like, trust me, this is the truth I have been told by mystic means. And you're like, well, I've already accepted that God can hear my thoughts and I have no proof. If God says this is the way of the world, let's go kill some people that are wearing blue. I know it's like an extreme, stupid example, but that's basically a lot of the religious beliefs that people have are very arbitrary and random and stupid, like across all religions, and you just accept them without thinking. Because if you thought about them, if you really thought about them, you would be like, bro, this makes no sense. Why am I doing this? Just because God tells me to, you'd be more like, this is actually detrimental to my life, lifestyle, to my happiness, to other people. Some of these beliefs are making me hurt other people, but we don't see so much questioning because people are used to believing that knowledge can be acquired through mystic means. And that is why it is so destructive. Many times when you fall into the trap of believing in mysticism, it's like you go all in. You don't really pick and choose. For example, people who are Christians believe pretty much everything their pastor tells them because it's supposed to be the good. He tells them God is good, then everything God says is good. But then some of the things the pastor is telling them don't really sound good. But who are they to pick and choose, right? They're supposed to believe everything. They already believe one thing that they don't have evidence for. Why not believe everything they don't have evidence for? And this is why having the right theory of knowledge is so important, to show us there is a proper way to gain knowledge and to know what is true, and to prevent us from falling into these traps of divine knowledge. And really, there's a lot more that can be said about epistemology, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is not meant to be a super in-depth conversation. This is not going to teach you everything you need to know about epistemology. This is just a very casual introduction conversation. But I think, personally, why I think epistemology is so important is because it has helped me realize that I disagree with theories of knowledge that say that knowledge cannot be acquired, or that you can never know if you have knowledge. Not only because I think you can methodically and scientifically prove that knowledge is possible, but also because by believing that you can never know anything, then how do you live life? Like, you're gonna live life in fear. You're gonna believe that you're not enough, that you're not gonna trust your mind. You're not gonna set goals for yourself, because why? You don't know anything, right? And I think it's also important to talk about this because there are a lot of people out there who are skeptical that you can never be sure of anything, right? But these are the same people who will use this insecurity that people have to try to push their own agendas, to try to push their own beliefs for their own convenience on other people. These are fortune tellers, mystics, religious leaders, and a bunch of other type of leaders who like to muddle reality to achieve their means. Luckily, by finding the right theory of knowledge, you can prove that no, knowledge is possible. You can know things, you can prove things, you can discover universal truths, and therefore you can confidently move in the world knowing that things are not just going to evaporate out of nowhere. You know, that things are not, it's not a wild west of elements, that things work in certain ways, and that way you can deal with reality. But anyways, this was just an introduction, keeping it short. Epistemology for dummies like me. If you want to know more, do more research. Personally, for me, it's not the subject that I'm more interested about. Like, in terms of philosophy, is probably the one I'm least interested in. But this topic was actually suggested to me on my Patreon. I asked, what kind of videos would you like to see? And somebody said epistemology, and I was like, you know what? That would be a challenging video for me to do. I'm gonna try it, because actually, you know, like I said, I hadn't really looked into it. But once I looked into it, I was like, oh, you know what? This is actually a pretty important subject for people in general. But you won't see me like making lots of videos about epistemology in the future, because it's not my personal favorite. It's very important, it's just not a personal favorite. Anyways, I probably missed some things that should have been covered, but you know, I wanted to keep it short. And yeah, I'm working full-time now, so it's really hard to make videos, but I'm gonna try to keep making them. So anyways, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.